Yeah, so let's get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome again. This is our first Empower Your VCE Journey seminar. And so tonight we're going to talk about VCE English as a mainstream subject. So my name's Emma. I'm the VCE course consultant here at QS School, and I'll also be the moderator of tonight's event. And sitting next to me are our three fantastic speakers, Brian, Ethan, and Phoebe. Brian is our VCE English teacher, and Ethan is one of our class tutors. And Phoebe, she graduated last year with a wonderful 8R result. So yeah, thank you guys for coming tonight. And yeah, we know that there are quite a lot of year 9s and year 10s in our audience, and of course a small amount of VCE students as well. Which year level you're in, we hope you do find our seminar tonight very informative and helpful. So without further ado, let's get started. First of all, can you please introduce yourself a bit more? So starting from Phoebe, please.
Okay. Hi guys, I'm Phoebe. I graduated in 2022 from Camberwell Girls Grammar School, and I'm currently studying an advanced degree in computer science with honours at Monash.
Hi everyone, I'm Ethan. I graduated in 2021 from Ivanhoe Grammar School, and I was tutoring last year here, and currently I'm studying, or in my second year of studying medicine at Monash University.
Hi, my name's Brian. I've been teaching for the last 15 years. Been teaching at QS for the last couple of years as well for the VCE components.
Right, thank you so much. Thanks for coming again. So the first part will be introduce the VCE English, like what exactly is this subject? So Brian, can you tell us more about VCE English and how a student assess in the subject, please?
Sure. So VCE English is the middle ground between 3 English subjects that are available for VCE units 3 and 4. So I'll just focus on units 3 and 4 as opposed to 1 and 2. There is English language, which is more technical about the wording and the language itself in terms of how it's used in syntax, grammar, and so on and so forth. In regards to English literature, it's more about expression. It's more about understanding deeper context of complex terms, and also certain texts that are probably a bit more detailed than what we normally used to. Whereas English is that nice middle ground between the two. You'll still analyze things like articles to understand its intentions, while at the same time still explore some deeper ideas behind certain texts that your school has selected come units 3 and 4.
Right, thank you. Some of our audience ask about the difficulty between English language, English, and English literature. Do you have any idea of how we should answer these questions?
So some schools will offer all 3 options. Some schools offer only 2 or even just 1. Mainstream English is the one that all schools have to offer in general. So it is expected that you normally enroll in that one. However, if your school does offer you different ones, you need to explore your strengths and weaknesses in the language. So for example, if you're comfortable exploring ideas in a movie or in a novel, then perhaps literature may be an option for you if you have the passion for it. If, however, you're more into understanding keywords, understanding its intentions and uses for, let's say, an article, or looking into how grammar works in regards to language use, then perhaps English language is a bit more logical and something that you could use there as well. However, like I said earlier, it's all dependent on your school subject selections as well.
Right, thank you. So how do students actually get assessed in VCE English? Do they have multiple exams throughout the year, or this one?
So with English, you are assessed on 2 key areas. One is the SAC, which is School Assessed Coursework, which happens throughout the semester, or 2 semesters, one for Unit 3, one for Unit 4. So within that semester, you will be assessed on things like analysis of argument and language, creative work. So in other words, your text that you're reading or watching has an option for you to explore the deeper ideas behind it, and then you are to create your own aspect linking to that text. Analysis of argument and language and comparing 2 texts as well, and also a speech as well, where you argue an issue relevant to a certain time period within the year. On top of that, you will be also assessed at the end of the year, 3 hours, 3 essays for 3 components. So one will be analysis of argument and language, one will be comparative 2 texts that you've been doing earlier in the year, and one will be a text response.
Right. So end of year exam 3 hours. You do 3 essays. You mean 1 hour for one, or this?
It is, well, it's because it's one exam or 3 hours.
Yeah.
It is suggested that you do 1 hour per essay, but that being said, it depends on your strengths and weaknesses in your own writing, and there's certain strategies involved. And I guess at QS we normally go through some of those strategies come end of year.
So the 3 components in the exam are actually equally divided back in the exam, right? The argument. Sorry, what's the 3?
So part 1 or section A will be your text response normally.
Text response.
There's a comparative, and then which is section B, and that will change next year. And of course, section C is your analysis of argument language.
Okay, so these 3.
Yeah, and normally if you go back to the VCAR website, even you can see the distribution of the marks as well. And also your teachers will go through those components with you. Your SACs overall are equivalent to a certain amount, and the exam takes up the rest as well. So the exam is rather important on the day.
Yeah, so SAC means school assessment. Does it mean every school assess differently? So for example, one school only assess on text response and the other only assess on comparative?
No, so the assessments are all the same. However, the texts may be different. And also depending on your school, perhaps the timing is different. So for example, Melbourne High does their assessment for 110 minutes. Some schools do theirs on 70, and there's plus and minuses between the two choices. So for example, 110 minutes gives you more time. However, does that help you, I guess, acclimatize to exam conditions? Probably not. Whereas 70 minutes gives you less time and you're under more pressure, but it's more in tune with the exam itself.
Right. So Phoebe and Ethan, can you share with us what were your SACs like back to your VCE?
Yeah, so with my school, my SACs were between 90 and 120 minutes, depending on which SAC. So we had quite a lot of time for our SACs. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, my school operated the same way as Phoebe's did. So yeah, around 90 to 120 minutes for our text response, comparative, and language analysis SACs. I might add to what Brian said. Although you get more time, I guess your teachers will take into account the fact that you had more time. So there's more of an expectation for, I guess, more writing, just better quality work in general with more time. Whereas with only 60 minutes, they will take into the fact that you only had 60 minutes to write into account.
Okay, thank you. Brian, we all know that VCE English is very important, but how important exactly it is for a student's overall VCE results?
So VCE is based off the idea that you will eventually get study scores for each of the subjects that you do. In general, you get students that do about 6 subjects. Sometimes you can do a little more or a little less, but only 6 count. Your top 4 in theory count as the full study score, and the last 2 will be 10%. However, it's actually more 3 and then English, an English subject. So that means ideally English is in your top 4 if you want to do really well. If, however, English is your weakest subject, let's say, or below your top 4, it does put you at a slight disadvantage, because one of your top scores in the top 4 is now relegated to a 10%, while your English one is included in its full entirety. So in that regard, English is rather important. It is something that you want to, I guess, avoid not doing it, not taking it seriously, because English does take a majority of your time as well in your classes. You probably realize it's quite a bit of subject time in it, so you probably want to do well in it as well.
Right, thank you. What study outcomes and abilities are expected from high achieving VCE students in this subject? And also, how can students use their knowledge in VCE English for the future studies and in their career?
So expression aside, VCE does focus on key skills. So skills like analyzing ideas, analyzing arguments, and being able to ascertain and compare certain viewpoints and how you can articulate your own. This is useful in the workforce as well. Ultimately, when you work, you will be interacting with other people. You may have different ideas, and therefore being able to articulate your ideas in a way that convinces others that you have the right path. Also, just understanding how others also analyze and look into ideas is also important for you. Comparing, so when you do comparative of text, you're also comparing analysis work as well. So it's another upper level skill. So with English, even though some of the topics may interchange with texts and whatnot, the fundamental skills still remain the same.
Yeah, you just mentioned about the comparative text, and a while before you said this will change next year, is it?
Yes, that's right.
So can you tell us about the study design change for the next few years, and also we know you've been to a conference, late conference, a few days before. What's your biggest insight from the conference?
So with the conference highlighting the changes for next year, most schools were already aware that there were going to be changes with the study design. What VCA has realized is certain students that were very capable of analyzing had an inherent advantage in the exam because more than one section focused on the analysis and less on the creative aspect, which even though it had one assessment in the SAC, it doesn't actually encapsulate all students to have that even ground. So as a result of that, they've decided to do crafting and creating of text as the new assessment for a section B, as well as Unit 1 and Unit 3 assessment as well. So in relation to that, it is something that most students are unfamiliar with, though they have touched a bit on it if they've done a bit of creative previously. Schools will obviously go through it in more detail come at the end of the year. So VCA hasn't given us the full details for the Unit 3 component because they're waiting for the first exam of this year to go through first before actually uploading those details.
Yeah, so it means that current year 11 students will get the first new study design. Right?
They already have. It's called crafting. So they're doing, in this case, looking into a variety of texts over a set thing that the teacher has decided. So in relation to that, they'll be looking and exploring some of the ideas there and how that relates to them, and then putting a personal account to it and expanding on those ideas. And they can actually cover a variety of forms. Even though there are certain distinct forms that your teacher will guide you towards, you will also be allowed to actually merge with certain other ones as well. It all depends again on what the topic is. However, by Unit 3 and also the exam or Unit 4 or VCE, that will change.
Okay, thank you. Next question, I'm gonna ask Phoebe and Ethan. So we mentioned about VCE English mainstream is the subject that most people choose, but we do aware there are English language and English literature. Can you tell us why did you both choose English mainstream instead of English language or literature?
Okay, so well, the reason why I chose English mainstream was because there were no other options in my school, but I think it goes a bit deeper than that. So Brian talked about earlier about how English mainstream was a bit of a happy medium between English literature and EAL. So just judging from a glance, I had a look at the study design for English literature and EAL. So literature focuses far more on the
English language, you mean?
Oh, sorry. Sorry. Okay, I'll start with Englang, but I also want to talk about literature as well because they're the three subjects you can do for English. So for EAL, it focuses far more on the technical aspects of writing. So analyzing singular words, analyzing the etymology of words, so how words actually came about, and also the lexicology of words. So analyzing words' purpose and meaning. So it's far more technical and language focused rather than expression focused. So on the other side of the spectrum, you have English literature, which is far more creative, I suppose, and expressive. So it really focuses on how well you write. And English mainstream is, it's a bit of a, I feel like it's a bit of a balance between the two, where you have lots of analysis pieces, for example, comparative text response and language analysis, but you also have the opportunity to express yourself more creatively. So for example, with the creative SAC, which is also getting incorporated into your exam this year. But I'd say if you really, really despise writing, then you should choose English or Englang, EAL.
Oh, EAL.
Oh my. Englang. Okay.
Everyone gets
I'm sorry.
Yeah, just adding on to what Ethan said, I think part of it's like I know for me at least, like pretty much all throughout high school, I've been doing text response, and then I started doing like analysis of argument language, which doesn't happen anymore, but like in year 9 or 10, right? So you've been like curating and like improving your abilities to do write these essays for so long, and especially if you're already doing like fairly okay or even pretty good in the assessments, you kind of just think, why not just continue? Might as well just keep going on. So, yeah.
Right, thank you. Now we're moving on. The next part is about the differences between VCE English and VCE, English learning in year 7 to 10. So first question, I'm gonna ask Phoebe and Ethan again. What was your biggest impression of VCE English when entering your year 11? Is there a big change of workload? What do our audience, our year 9 and year 10 audience expect next year or next few years? And are there any change of ways of assessment comparing VCE English and the English you learned in previous years? But Phoebe just mentioned this quite a consistent thing. Yes, so shall we start with Phoebe?
Okay, so yeah, I think in terms of assessments, I personally think it was like pretty consistent throughout. Maybe like I know in year 9 and 10 we were allowed to bring in quote sheets. You definitely weren't allowed to do that in VCE, obviously. And in terms of workload, I think English is a subject where that's kind of up to the individual student. I know for me and a lot of my friends, we felt like the change in workload was more drastic between year 11 and year 12 than year 10 and year 11.
Yeah.
And that's mostly because, we recognize, we've got to actually work hard for the subject if we want to do well. So we give ourselves more tasks to do. So like reading background info, writing more essays, maybe asking more questions. So that workload increases naturally once you're like trying harder. But like in reality, if you don't want to write essays at all, you could very much get away with like not doing very much. But you won't do as well because it's very much, you get as much as you put out.
So just adding to what Phoebe said. So from what I remember from my, I guess, year 8 to 10, I feel like the assessments were very similar to what you have in VCE. So your school will prepare you for language analysis, for comparative, for text response, and for creative. However, it's just that the final exam in those years, so year 8 to 10, might be a bit easier. So you might just have to do a text response or a single language analysis. In year 11, you just get the full spread of exams and stacks, basically, the same as year 12. And also with the added workload. So I think I'll just go through a bit of what my English study habits look like in year 12 to get the score that I did. So I'd like to, in the lead up to a SAC or when we started the new text, I always made sure I was far ahead of the class. So by the time the class had started reading, I made sure I had already read the book and done my own preliminary analysis with my tutor. And so this was around 6 to 4 weeks before the SAC, depending on how the timetables went. And then 2 weeks after that, which is about the time that the class finished the text, I'd be able to also get some additional analysis from my teacher as well. And this would help me to start writing my essays. So this is around 4 to 3 weeks out of the SAC, and I'll already be starting writing my essays. And I made sure that these essays were, they were the best that I could write. So I didn't give myself a time limit for these essays. And I always tried to write enough essays to cover a really broad range of themes. And then perhaps the week before, or a week and a bit before, I would start my memorization and planning phase. So what this involved was just memorizing a lot of important evidence or evidence that I felt was important to be able to just put down on the paper, like when I found a related topic. So yeah, I feel like students should do some memorizing. They can't just go in the exam and wing it, as they say. And what I mean by planning is just grabbing as many topics as you can. So practice topics that you get from your teacher, from your tutor, and just giving yourself 15 minutes to write a rough plan on what it should look like. So that should include your contention and your 3 body paragraphs.
Yeah. And just quickly adding on to what Ethan said, it's really important, I think, to start writing essays like as soon as you can, even if you think, I don't know the themes very well, or that you don't know the book that well. start writing those essays. And especially like if you want to go talk to your school teacher, then no one else will be submitting essays. So you'll get those essays back really fast, and typically with like a lot more feedback than further on in the SAC period. Yeah. And you can get like real insight into like what your teacher wants from you, what your teacher like expects.
Yes, great advice and very detailed from Ethan as well. So Brian, from a teacher's perspective, is there any shift in learning objectives from high school to VCE? And do you have any tips to share with the new in Unit 1, 2, and Unit 3 for students?
So, as said earlier by Ethan and Phoebe, the ideas behind what you'll be learning from semester 10 builds onto essentially the more sophisticated ideas expected by Units 1, 2, 3, and 4. What you need to think about is the bigger ideas behind, let's say, the text that you're exploring, because you've been doing that already for quite some time since year 7. I'm sure your teachers have already given you text to read or to watch at one point or another. So you already have an idea of what your teacher's trying to guide you towards. What you need to start doing is layering your complexity about ideas that are more fundamental or universal in nature. So common texts explore things such as discrimination or identity and all those more universal concepts that go beyond the text itself. In Units 3 and 4 in particular, you explore that further and find out more detailed nuances between those ideas. So I guess what I'm trying to tell you is you need to build on top of the knowledge and skills you already have. So if you haven't been, I guess, taking the subject seriously between now 7s to 10s, it probably means that you need to start analyzing what you're being assessed on and what skills will be the key focus that your teacher will be looking into. So once you do that, you find that it's more efficient for you to go through your work, and therefore you can find out where your weaknesses are within the assessment. For, I guess, Units 1 to 4, the biggest thing that I find students that struggle are the ones that don't attempt the work because they don't want to make a mistake. So my suggestion is to draft, make mistakes, especially when there's no or low consequences. So what I mean by that is if you're, like what Phoebe said earlier, drafting and sending to your teacher work before your teacher's asked for it, any mistake that you do, let's assume it's horrendous, as in there's so many mistakes in there, you're getting feedback that will help you fix it without any consequence to your study score or your SAC or anything else in between. So what's really important is to be organized, like what Ethan said earlier, to get ahead of your peers. I suggest 2 weeks normally, because 2 weeks at least means that even if you're sick, let's say, you still have time and a bit of a buffer to then catch up and get your 2 weeks back. It gives you the opportunity to then draft and get the work done prior, but it still gives you opportunities to listen to the class about ideas that you may not have considered prior to reaching that point in your work. So that way that when you're actually doing the work, you're actually revising concepts, delving deeper into concepts, and also exploring strategies to speed up your writing. Ultimately, one of the level of intelligences that's been explored in your SACs and your exams is speed. Time is a factor because your SACs do have a finite amount of time. So even if you have a lot of great ideas, if you can't express them on paper within that time limit, it does put you at a disadvantage from the rest of the peers that do.
Yes, thank you. Very many helpful advice here. And as we have many year 9, year 10s audience today, can you give them some advice, like how can they effectively prepare for VCE English from that age?
I think the most efficient way of, I guess, improving areas that students struggle with is probably knowing news and also a lot more reading. Because one of your key, I guess, assessments in Units 3 and 4 in particular is an analysis of argument and language, coupled with the fact that you're doing a speech about a current issue at that certain point in time. It means being aware of social issues and being aware of current issues in the news is really important. I suggest reading a variety of different opinions. You don't have to agree with those opinions, but you want to explore and understand how people try to persuade you or how they use language in a certain way that you may not be familiar with. Reading other texts, be it non-fiction or fiction, will also give you the opportunity to see how people use their words in a way that you may not have considered before, or they have presented ideas that you previously assumed were very different from your own. So that's probably where I would suggest you should start thinking about as a year 9 or year 10 student. Obviously, doing well in your assessments with your subject is also important, but taking that extra step and then also timing yourself for it is also something that I suggest is useful for you, because you can then see for yourself whether or not you're writing at a certain pace. These days, now that we have computers and we use them more and more often, a lot of students don't really write as much as they used to. So it's probably something that most students don't consider as well.
Right. Thank you so much. Phoebe and Ethan, do you have anything to add on?
You first. So I think what Brian said about reading is really the most important thing that you can do at your age. So, year 7, 8, 9, 10, because the vocab, grammar, and punctuation is the thing that's universal across all the English that you'll be doing, and reading helps a lot. So tutoring at QS and also reading some of my friends' essays in the past, it's really surprising how much the level of language varies in year 12. And you really, really want to get good with your vocab in year 12. So reading, it could be anything. It doesn't have to be school books. It doesn't have to be books with a really profound or deep meaning. It doesn't have to be philosophy books. It can be anything. So books that I was reading in maybe year 8 or 9 included Harry Potter, Fahrenheit 451, The Book Thief, if anyone knows these. So just any books. I really like reading fantasy books, and I feel like that really helped with my vocabulary.
And I mean, it's just adding on to Ethan, because I agree with the reading books thing. Yeah. Because in year 12, you're all like with comparative and with text response. Everyone in your cohort is learning those texts for the first time. Everything they learn about that text is all from year 12. So you all start from the same playing field, right? So reading books, right? You improve your vocabulary, you improve that grammar, right? And it just sets you like a little bit above everyone else just from the get-go.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We are gonna move on to the next part. So we're gonna focus on VCE English, how to achieve good results in VCE English. I'm gonna start with Phoebe, as you just finished your exam last year. So what's your best tips and insights for studying this subject? Just a brief introduction, a brief overview of your journey, please.
Yeah. So I think it's worth mentioning that I wouldn't say that I went into began year 12 with that much feeling that confident in English and thinking that I would do maybe as well as I did. Mostly because my grades in year 11 in English weren't super high. Yeah, but I think going back to the fact that everyone's learning your text for the first time, everyone begins the year basically, not knowing that much. You can really it's really easy to put yourself ahead in English because you just, you start working harder. And I think English is very much a subject, the harder you work, the better you'll do. Yeah. And I think another thing that helped me a lot in year 12 was working with your friends. So when you talk to your friends about ideas and plan, even if just planning essay topics together, you think of they give you snippets of the book and evidence that you might not have considered, and it can be really insightful to hear what other people think. I know I planned essay topics with my friends in school, and then at QS for the comparative, me and I think 4 of my friends, we had a doc with Ethan and Haley, and we had all of our quotes, a lot of the evidence that we wrote, and it just when you're stuck on an essay topic and you can't think of stuff to say, it can be really useful to go back to that and think, what did someone else think? Yeah. And I think really don't focus in on the fact that you're competing with people, because at the end of the day, so many people do English that you and all your friends can do well if you guys are all working hard. So I think it's really important just to help each other out, I guess.
Yeah, anything to add on, Ethan? What's your best tips for it?
So I agree with everything Phoebe said, and also stuff that's already been said so far in the seminar. So writing lots of essays, getting ahead of your peers, and also setting yourself up for success right now by reading a lot. I feel like the most important thing for some people is just staying motivated, even though you might not be the best at English right now. So you might be horrendous at English, in year 7, 8, 9, or 10, and I was in the same position as you. So I failed my year 9 and 10 English exams, and I was a very average English student in year 11, so 70s and 80s. However, in year 12, as soon as I did really well in year 12 throughout all my SACs. And As soon as I got that first good mark in my creative stack, I, just find your motivation. So from that, I feel like that's when I started thinking that I can do this. I can do well in English, because before it was such an impossible task. So just find a way to get yourself motivated and know that it is possible to get good at English, essentially.
Just sorry, quickly adding on again. I think it's a lot more effective to be writing like one essay a week consistently than, let's say, you're coming up to SAC and you write an essay a day, right? Because that way you're getting feedback regularly and you have more time to think about how you actually implement that feedback. And I don't know, just consistent work with anything really is just a lot more effective than cramming it in at the last minute.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I think you must be agreeing with all what Fabian said.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So, any other tips you want to add on if a student wants to achieve, for example, 40+ study score English?
Sure. So when you're trying to get a study score of 40+, you're effectively trying to reach the top 9+% of the cohort that you're in. So it does mean that you can't, I guess, leave things to chance or just rely on your talent alone. A lot of students that I've taught in the past that are very capable in this subject sometimes struggle to reach those goals because they assume that their talent is enough to reach it. But effectively, you're competing with people that are roughly the same talent as you are. So what it does mean is you need to start thinking about systems put in place for yourself, like strategies of handing in work early, doing an essay earlier, and also once a week as opposed to every day, because it does wear you out mentally. I've always advocate the idea of planning your essays. So in other words, if you're given 40 essay topics, don't do 40 essays. That's rather counterproductive. I would argue that 40 essay plans is far more useful. It's quicker to do, but you also realize there's a pattern that within, let's say, those 40 essay plans, there might be only about 5 or 6 that are remarkably different from each other, and the rest are all variations of it. So you're not actually doing 40 essay plans. What you're observing instead is the variations within it. When it comes to essentially a 40+ type of study score that you're after, getting feedback from your teachers and getting a lot of, I guess, analysis of what your results are or how you're going is really important. So for example, if you're struggling with timing, figure out what aspects are slowing you down within your writing, or when it comes to a complex idea that you haven't been able to grasp, ask why a certain idea that you're thinking about is on the right track or not. So those type of deeper level thinking or deeper level ideas is what you want to start tackling at that 40+ stage, and then being able to articulate it within a set time frame. Don't plan, if your exam is 60 minutes, don't plan to write in 60 minutes. You have to write in about 50 to 55. So then also importantly, being able to plan. I've seen a lot of students stumble when it comes to their goals when they don't plan their essays and they don't plan their work. So I've seen really poorly annotated analysis of argument and language articles where they just circle and highlight things but don't actually write out what useful information is needed from it. So again, having those aspects, I guess, refined before the exam or the assessment is really useful.
Thank you so much. Very important points here. Next question I'm going to ask Ethan. How can students effectively analyze and interpret text in VCE English? And what are some common mistakes that students make in VCE English? How can they be avoided?
Sure. So I'll go through some common mistakes first. So some of the most common things I've observed that students don't do enough is not enough time to practice and planning, or very poor planning. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. You want to be doing as much planning as possible. So you want to be doing planning as much as possible in as much time as possible. So give yourself ample time to prepare your plans. And the next biggest mistake, I think, is students not memorizing enough for their exams. So commonly, a lot of people just memorize quotes or ideas in general. But the type of memorization I'm talking about is where you just learn or copy down some of the evidence that you've written for your past essays that you think would be really effective and covers a broad range of themes. Because when you enter an exam, it's always really good when you see a topic that you think, oh, this is exactly like something I've written before, and you can just get down text really fast. So you save yourself some time. But there's also a caveat that comes to memorizing, just straight memorizing and putting it onto the text, because sometimes you are at risk of, I guess, not understanding what you're writing and not understanding, what you've read and are putting down onto the text. So yeah, so really just try and understand the ideas behind what you're writing. So it could be, your tutor's writing, it could be from your own, it could be your teachers. Just try to learn what they're actually talking about and try to adapt it to different text topics. I feel like that was the thing that helped me the most. So going back to what Brian said earlier, I think Brian was talking about the variations between topics, and I think you really are trying to observe for that variation, because a lot of the time you will find that topics have very similar themes. It's just that they might differ by a few words, or they might differ in the fact that they're a quote topic, they're a how topic. So yeah, you're really just trying to find, I guess, the optimal evidence that you can slot into each of these topics. So I think another mistake might be, so there's way more technical mistakes, like, not linking enough, or summarizing and not analyzing, or not being controlled enough, which I won't go through now. You can find that if you join QS VCE English. Okay, so those are a lot of the mistakes. And to do well in VCE English, I feel like we've gone through a lot already. So read a lot right now, do a lot of time practices, and make sure you're ahead of your peers and writing essays as soon as you can.
Yeah, thank you, Ethan. Brian, do you have anything more to add on, or do you have some tips and advice for helping students who are struggling with their studies, or just simply dislike writing?
So if you dislike writing, or you find the subject rather difficult, it also depends on your goals. But what I ultimately tell my students, because I teach at public schools as well, where there are students that don't like English, who find the subject a bit of a struggle, it's understanding the most efficient route from point A to point B and understanding the assessment. Ultimately, if you understand what is the purpose of the assessment, you want to then be able to cover the key grounds of what the assessment entails. So that means if it's analysis, then I need to find certain things in there that tick off, as it were, the things that teachers are after. Practicing through them means that even though you might not like the subject, you don't have to like a subject to do well in it. So when I was in high school, so I'm going back quite a bit there, I did double maths, double science, and English. Funnily enough, I didn't like physics and chem, but I did reasonably well in them compared to the subjects that I did enjoy. So it's the idea that you understand the concept of what I'm being assessed on, essentially. So if you are someone that struggles in the subject, look into the bare bone fundamentals behind it. Understand those areas and get those areas covered first. So you'll find that it will build up your confidence. You find that you'll cover most of the areas, so you're more confident that you'll pass the assessment. From there on in, because it's more efficient from point A to point B to cover those areas, you're not stressing about variables that don't matter. And it does mean that once you get used to that, you can actually build on top of that to actually, hopefully, get to a level where you might enjoy the subject a little bit more. Might not be your favorite subject, but again, you build on top of it to get a better score and also build confidence in the subject area.
Yes, thank you, Brian. The next part, we're going to move on to our currently VCE English class. So now we have only one VCE Unit 1-2 class and one Unit 3-4 class in US. And Ethan is one of our English Unit 3-4 class tutors. So can you tell us more about how is it structured? Because as Brian said, different schools have different text lists. How are you managing our 20 students in one class? What's your structure of teaching?
Yeah, sure. So so when students come into class, they'll get ticked off the roll, and then we'll be broken up into groups of 4 or 5 depending on text allocations. So what I mean by that is, right now, me and another tutor, Aya, we're taking all of the Melbourne High students,
right,
because we've all learned and analyzed their text before. Okay. So currently they're doing their creative Much Ado About Nothing, and there's 6 of them. So me and Aya will take them into a separate room, and we'll split up into groups of 3 and 3. And then, so last week we did a group activity together, but the following week, so this week, we might try to do one-on-one separately. So that happens with all the other groups as well, and the tutors and students. So that's the reason why we have tutors, because it'd probably be a big burden on Brian to teach every single text separately. So that's why we have tutors. So to help out in the class, who are familiar with the text and can just help with any requests that the students have and teach about the text as well, just in these little groups. So currently, or last year, the team was me, Haley, our lead tutor, Aya and Singtung. And this year, sadly, Singtung had to leave due to university commitments, but now we have Emily and Grace joining the team. So everyone here has done really well in English. Scores of 45 plus all around. And you'll have a good experience here, and we'll help you as much as possible. So our responsibilities, along with our in-class duties, will also involve marking students' essays, so replying to students outside of just QS school hours, and just answering any questions they have about English. So sometimes the class will remain together as 20 students, and this is if Brian wants to go over a structure with them. So in the lead up to exams, usually we're all trying to prepare them. We're all trying to just get them back in shape for the fundamentals. So for example, some students would have done language analysis at the start of the year, but it would have been 8 or 9 months until they have to practice that again for the exam. So in order to prepare them for that, Brian will just take everyone together as a group and go through some of the basic structures and things that you should be doing. So yeah, I think that's a good description of how class usually works.
Yeah, thank you for telling us that. So also for Ethan, how do you think students can make better use of resources provided by you guys as tutors? So yeah, we can see some audience who are already our students. Can you tell them a bit more how you can help them better?
Okay, so the most important thing is to communicate with your tutors. So not just by submitting essays, but like I said earlier, we will respond to any question you have about English and maybe even outside of English. So yeah, just communicate with your tutors. And following on from that, you need to submit your work that we assign you. So every week, maybe after the first week, allowing for time to learn the text, we will set you an essay to do that week, and it's expected that you hand it in, and so we can give you feedback. And we've always found that the trend amongst the students is those who do their work consistently and on time will score much better than those who don't.
Yeah, like Phoebe did.
Yes, Phoebe. Yeah, last year Phoebe handed in a lot of essays, and she did so every week. And in terms of actual resources, so that varies depending on tutors, but usually you do get some VATE or inside text. So I'm not sure if the audience knows what that is, but it's essentially just, I guess, a collection of analyses and just understandings by VCE examiners or even high scoring students. So just really good analysis of text that Brian would usually give to the students. And the other resources that we give just varies amongst the students. So what I like to do is I like to hand out some of my sample essays in preparation for SACs. And I also like to give my students some just deeper readings to go through and understand. So I really like to browse journal articles about English and just get them to read relevant things about that.
Thank you, Ethan. Phoebe, how about you? So what's your most helpful aspect? What's the most helpful aspect of your class last year, and what are some suggestions to current English students if they want to get the most out of the class?
So I think Ethan's kind of touched on a little, but really just communicate with your tutors. Like there's so many of them. You're gonna find someone who's like, maybe if you're struggling, who's gonna be someone who's like experienced your problem or at least knows how to help you. And also because there's 6 of you now in class. It's not really like you have to disturb the whole class to go ask a question. And I mean, if you're really uncomfortable with asking in person, you can always email them. And then once again, just some with what Ethan said, submitting your essays. A lot of the time, English isn't your only subject, so sometimes time's a little cramped, you don't really want to do it. But even if let's say it's a really busy week, you have other SACs going on, at least submitting a few body paragraphs. If it's not a full essay, for them to you're putting in some work. They've got something to mark and they've got something to give you feedback on. And I mean, as always, it's really important to ask questions if you need help. The tutors are really friendly, so got nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing. And now we're moving on to our Q&A section. So I'm going to go through a few questions that our audience had in their registration form while I'm asking these questions. So current audience, please feel free to drop down any questions in the Q&A section under the Zoom screen. So I'm going to ask for Amelia, who's in Year 12 here. She's currently in our class right now. So tips on how to score well in the final exam. Shall I ask Ethan?
On me.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would say you should dedicate just dedicate the biggest proportion of your time to studying for English. And your preparation period for the exam should start sometime around September. And what you should be doing is going through. All right, so I'll talk about two phases, the preparation phase and the actual exam. So for preparation, you should familiarize yourself again with language analysis, text response, and comparative, depending on which one you did the earliest. And things that you should be actually doing to practice include re-memorizing quotes and also ideas, and also going through your past essays and selecting, like I did, just really good pieces of writing or evidence that you think would cover a broad range of themes appropriate for the exam. And in the exam itself, you always want to do section C first, because the way that the exam is set out is you have 15 minutes reading time and 3 hours writing time. So in the 15 minutes of reading time, I recommend spending 5 minutes looking at section A and B topics and deciding on a rough plan and which topics you're going to choose for section A and B, because you have a choice between two. And for the rest of the 10 minutes, you can read the section C and get an understanding of what the arguments are. And then as soon as the reading time is up, you can start writing section C. So if you were to come back to section C, you'd probably have to read it again and waste time and waste your precious writing time, just, remembering the text again and understanding again. So yeah, my tips.
Yeah, great. Brian, anything to add on?
In relation to doing well in the final exam, I would suggest looking through trial papers, but I would suggest that last year's paper be the last one that you do.
Yeah.
So, for example, there are organisations like VATE has their own exams, TSSM had their own exams as well. So I would suggest doing some of the harder ones just to get feedback about how you're going and also responses. And they also normally give you sample responses as well. Someone like myself and the tutors will also give you feedback about any drafts that you do. And then I think it's best for you to do the last exam. So in this case, the VCE exam last year as your final preparation to see how it is realistically for you, how you're handling it. And then obviously from there, you're as ready as you can be for the exam itself.
Right, thank you very much. Next question from Jess, who's in Year 11 currently. Please recommend oral speech topics for Unit 1 and 2 or 3 and 4. Shall I start from Phoebe?
Yeah, so with Unit 3 and 4 and some schools for Unit 1 and 2 as well, you have to choose something that's been in the news for like September last year or something. Your school will have your teachers will let you know what time period. And so like browse the news regularly and I think find this topic that you at least have an interest in and would be interested in, because you have to do quite a large amount of research and you have to read a lot and then write lots about this one topic. So it's good to choose something that you do have an interest in, I think. And yeah, no real oral speech topic is inherently better than the other.
Yeah.
It's important to write your own because you'll sound way more natural talking about it and presenting it if it is your own writing than if you're copying someone else's. But honestly, you can do well with any oral topic.
Though I do suggest that I caution against really big topics like massive ones like, let's say, US gun control or abortion or those type of topics, because they're so broad and your teacher and your assessment is a very finite timed one, you just won't have the opportunity to go in depth with your speech. So again, it's a bit about the idea of, yes, choose a topic that you're passionate with, but be aware that if it's too broad, it may limit your ability to actually show your strengths.
And in terms of actually how to find some good topics that have been in the news recently, there's a website called The Conversation, which shows relevant issues from Australia, in the past few months or so. And that was where I found my topic. So my topic was arms exportation from Australia, and that was in 2020 to 2021. So yeah, the conversation.
The conversation. Thank you. And next question from Mary. Can you recommend some reading books which can improve writing? And also we got a question from Vincent from year 7 below. Yes, can you share any resources or books that help you the most for English study, like book recommendations?
Okay, so there really is no best book to improve your writing. Any book will do. So trust me, and I think everyone here would agree that any book will do. So you can read whatever genre you like. You can read science fiction, fantasy. You can read philosophy books if that's what floats your boat. You can read books with a more profound meaning, or you can read your school text. So as long as you do reading, it helps. You could just go to your local library and just go to a shelf from young adults and just pick out any random book and start reading it. So yeah, any book will do.
Yeah. Brian, do you have any name books in your mind?
Less about books, but more about being aware of different writing styles or different styles in general is also useful. So I recommend, you may not agree with the newspapers that you might read, but you want to see how they use language. So perhaps reading opinion pieces from, let's say, the ABC, the Herald Sun and the Age. Those ones, even though they may be very different in terms of their positions within the same issue, you get to see how people write to try to convince you or persuade you that their ideas are valid or that their viewpoint is the correct one. So that way you get to see how language is used in a different way that you may not be familiar with. So I suggest that might be also a useful way for you to spend your time reading.
Yes, newspapers is also a good way. Next question from Sharon. What are some practical ways of increasing my vocabulary? Also, how can students improve their grammar in English? Vocabulary and grammar.
Reading, definitely. Just going back to
Again,
reading.
yeah.
Read when you have the chance, and like it's a very you're subconsciously like improving your vocab and grammar. Like it's a lot less tedious than, let's say, if you wanted to actually open a dictionary and like memorize words out of it. And I mean, I always like, and I think Ethan and Brian as well, like reading books is kind of fun. Like, you know, you enjoy it and it doesn't feel like you're actually studying, but your, you know, vocab and grammar is progressively getting better. Actually, I think, yeah.
Yes. So yeah, we don't want to sound like a broken record, but reading will improve all these things: vocabulary, grammar, punctuation, and expression in general.
So I know some students in my classes that I've taught in the past have started to use audiobooks, and it does help. That being said, like what Ethan said earlier, you can't see grammar, so you can't really see punctuation as easily with audiobooks. So reading does have a value that you just can't have with an audiobook. So I do suggest that when it comes to reading, you want to actually you'll learn through osmosis. So in other words, you just see what is already correct. If you think about it, if you're reading from a newspaper or you're reading from a book that's published, someone's already checked the work, someone's checked what's been written, and they agree that it's technically correct in terms of the sentence structure, in terms of how it makes sense overall within a book. So it is in your best interest to read because it gives you, I guess, a prototype of what is correct language use. So if you don't do that, you're actually putting yourself at a slight disadvantage when it comes to building on top of your knowledge or skill set for writing better. Because if you're already nervous or not confident, then it's in your best interest to find examples where they are actually correct for you.
Thank you, Brian. The last question I got from Sabrina: how to decide which subjects should be chosen for VCE? So it's not necessarily on VCE English, but generally on VCE subject selection.
Okay. So honestly speaking, you need to actually talk to your careers teacher. So professionally speaking, as a teacher, we're also told we are not to give you like definitive advice. We can give you our experiences. We can even give you our thoughts. But at the end of the day, you're supposed to go to your careers teacher for it because they give you the most accurate options available to you. What I would suggest when it comes to your subjects is you need to actually have a game plan. It doesn't have to be a very detailed game plan. So what I mean by that is if you want to go to uni, number one, what ideal uni do you want to go to, and roughly what field? So you don't want to say, for example, I want to do arts or science, and they're very far apart, and you've chosen subjects that don't relate to either, because again, that doesn't really help you either way. I've had, unfortunately, situations where when I've done career counseling, where students have told me their goals and they haven't looked at what those goals entail. So there are minimum requirements. So one of them was a student that wanted to be a musician. She was in year 10. She wanted to go to Monash, and the minimum requirement was level 8 for an instrument, and she hasn't even started an instrument yet. So in regards to that, it put her at a real disadvantage. She just couldn't reach her goal. Ultimately, that means her game plan wasn't planned out, and she struggled to reach those goals, and ultimately, unfortunately, she didn't reach those goals. What you need to think about when it comes to these situations is have a game plan that is, I guess, versatile enough for you to move, and be aware once you're in uni, you can still transfer again if you've realized that the subject that you're doing doesn't match your overall ideas, because sometimes that does happen. Like for me, I actually did a different subject before I went into teaching, and I realized that wasn't for me before I actually transferred within the same uni.
Thank you. Anything from Phoebe and Ethan?
I mean, it's always good to look at, like what Brian said, prerequisites for your subjects. If you're unsure, like what exactly you want to go in, maybe you want to do subjects that are prerequisites for a lot of like different courses for uni. But ultimately, like it's up to you what you're interested in. Like I know you've probably heard this lots of times, but don't do subjects just with scaling, you know, do subjects you like. And I mean, you can succeed with any combination of subjects. So.
Yep, I agree, and nothing else said.
Yeah, very well said from Phoebe and Brian. Now I'm going into the Q&A section to see what are the questions our audience said. Okay, so when the tutors mentioned that they wrote regularly and submitting essays to the teachers earlier for feedback, do you mean the day school teachers, and what do they write on, and do they prepare for specific text for SAC?
Yeah, I'll answer this one because I'm a tutor. So you can choose to send your, I guess, practice essays to the tutors here or your teacher at your day school, but I recommend doing both because you are coming here and we are available to mark your essays. And they do prepare a specific text for each SAC. So as Brian said earlier, there's 4 SACs that require you to learn a text. So there's creative, text response, and comparative. So that's 4 texts in total. So and for each SAC they will learn a specific text. But for SACs like language analysis and your oral presentation, you don't need to learn a text.
Thank you. Else, do you have any other questions? Any PowerPoint slides to summarize on the type of English subjects exam questions? We don't have a PowerPoint now, but we can just quickly recap of what's the type of English subjects and exam questions are. For example, English mainstream, English language, and English literature. And if you're second language, you do EAL, right? That's beautiful for English subjects. And exam questions. So Brian, can you tell us again about the 3 sections in the final exam of English?
So with the English exam, for example, you'll be broken up to 3 parts. Section A will be a text response. So that means a selected text within your school is given as 2 options, which you'll choose one to write an essay for. The same thing is applied again for the comparative. So in other words, you have 2 texts, like a movie and a play, or a movie and a novel, or just 2 separate texts. And from there, again, you'll have to write an essay based on that. And section C is your analysis of argument language. So that one is the one you have no idea about. So in other words, they will give you a topic, let's say an article or an email that highlights an issue, which you will then analyze and go through the combinations there with the image and the response to it as well.
Yes, thank you. Okay, do you have another question? Yeah, there's no more questions yet. We're just on time. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming tonight. So many important points and valuable insights. And we hope everyone enjoyed this seminar and have all gotten a lot from our conversations. Thank you guys for coming again, and have a good evening to everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you.